this is going to be a town hall where we talk about Black fatherhood, and we're very excited to have a special guest panel of Black fathers to join us here today to cover a wide variety of topics, including the recent police killing and harassment of unarmed Black men. Those events that we've seen on television and we've seen on the internet has brought up the conversations that we have as Black fathers with our sons and our daughters about how to protect themselves during routine traffic stops by police officials. So we want to sit back, especially as Father's Day is coming up, and talk about Black fatherhood and how we receive the talk and how we are giving the talk to our own children. So part of this is we're going to talk about it around the new book, Black Panther, Tales of Wakanda. I was lucky enough to be the editor of this great compilation of stories about the Black Panther and Wakanda. And having been in the Black Panther world for a while, one of the things that we don't talk about enough around the Black Panther is the fact that it's the story of a father and a son. When we talk about Black Panther, we think about Wakanda, we think about vibranium, we think about African relations, we think about racism, we think about colonialism. But the whole story of the Black Panthers surrounds the story of T'Chaka and his son T'Challa, and how T'Challa, the new Black Panther, works at trying to live up to the memory of his father. So we decided to take time today and talk about being Black fathers and talk about how we give that talk to our children and the state of Black fatherhood in America today. Now, once again, this is going to be a conversation, not an interview. So instead of making you listen to me for most of it, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. And then we'll start the conversation. Now, I'm going to ask all our panelists to do something a little bit special today. In addition to introducing yourself, I'm also going to ask you, how many children do you have and how old your children are? So it'll go something like this. Once again, my name is Jesse Holland. I'm the editor of Black Panther, Tales of Wakanda. I'm also the Saturday host of Washington Journal on C-SPAN and an assistant professor of journalism at George Washington University here in Washington, D.C. I am the proud father of a 14-year-old daughter and a son who can't wait till July 4th so you can say that he's 13 and a teenager. So let's go from there, and I'll start with my friend Panama. You're up next, man.
What's going on? Very excited to be here. Thanks for the invite, of course. Excited to have this conversation and see where it goes. My name is Panama Jackson. I'm one of the co-founders of VerySmartBrothas.com, currently a senior editor of VerySmartBrothas, which is now a vertical of TheRoot.com. I have 4 children, a 12-year-old daughter, and 3 sons aged 6, 5, and almost 8 months. So I am a very busy father of many children who are all the light of my life at all times.
I hear you, man. Jerry Barrow, you're up next.
Thanks for having me. My name is Jerry. I'm a career entertainment journalist and currently the creator and host of the Fathers Who Bother podcast. And I am the proud father of an 18-year-old boy, well, now man, technically, and a 12-year-old girl who I love very much.
All right, Fatiyn Muhammad, you're up next, my friend.
Wow, he was very he was very short and sweet.
Yeah, he sort of surprised us all with his brevity.
Short and sweet right there. Well, folks, first of all, it's great to be talking amongst Black men, Black brothers here. So I'm glad to take part in this afternoon. You can see I'm still in the studio from early this morning, but I'm a producer. I produce 2 nationally syndicated talk shows for Reverend Al Sharpton. I also I'm the executive producer for a show called Openline, which now I am the host of that. That's on air at WBLS 107.5 in New York City. And I also host their WBLS Facebook page live show that comes on after our on-air show, 9 a.m. Sunday mornings. And then we do a Wednesday 2-hour live from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. And just real briefly, I have 2 daughters. One is the oldest, Fatiyn Yasmin. She's 28. She'll be 29 in August. And then my youngest daughter is Rakaya, who is 25. So both are grown, Rakaya Janae. And I just want to say this one thing, that back in the mid 80s, I joined the United African Movement organization in Brooklyn, which consists of Reverend Al Sharpton and attorneys Alton Maddox and C. Vernon Mason. And that began the road of my activism out here. So not only being active on the ground, but I've taken my activism and been able to transform it into radio. So I was just ready to share any and all information that I can.
And last but definitely not least is Adrian Jordan. Adrian, tell us about yourself.
Good afternoon. As Jesse said, I'm Adrian Jordan. I'm proud native Washingtonian, born and raised, FAMU educated, and back here with all the tools I learned in Tallahassee. I want to start also by saying thank you for being a part of this. Not only am I grateful to be a part of it, I am interested to see how the conversation goes with some of the many distinguished members of this panel. I am a father of a 9-year-old, and he thinks he's 18. So whoever's lucky with 13, he already thinks he's 18. And we have a newborn, another son on the way on July 4th. So that'll be something else we have in common if he actually comes on that date. So once again, I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I hope we can all learn from it and help those who are watching as well.
One of the things we all talked about before we put this panel together was the fact that Black fathers get a bad rap. The stereotype is that Black fathers aren't there, Black fathers don't know their children, Black fathers don't take care of their children. So if you are watching us on Zoom or on Facebook Live, I want my Black fathers to drop in the chat or in the comments on Facebook your name and the name and who your children are, because we want people to know that there are Black fathers out there, and that we not only know who our children are, we are great parts of our children's lives. So drop your name and your children into the chat on Zoom or in the comments on Facebook. Let me also remind you that you also can drop questions that you want us to address later on in this talk about things that you want us to perhaps discuss. So remember, you can do it in the Q&A on Zoom, or you can drop your question into the comment section on Facebook Live. Now, gentlemen, let's get into it. Not only are we all Black fathers with children of different ages, we're all Black fathers from different parts of the country. We all grew up in different parts. We have a native Washingtonians. I'm originally from Mississippi, from a cotton farm in Mississippi. So we all grew up in different places and at different times. But I'm willing to bet we all had the talk with someone in our immediate surrounding, whether it was a father, an uncle, a friend, a frat. We all had that talk. And so what I want to start off with is having each of you talk a little bit about who gave you the talk and how you received it. For example, for me, my mom and my father sat me down at the same time because they both grew up in the same part of Mississippi where I grew up, a little town called Holly Springs, Mississippi, about 40 miles south of Memphis. Because both my father and my mother knew of people their ages who had been not only harassed by the police, but some people who had disappeared after having dealt with the police. So my parents sat me down together and talked about the things you do when you're alone on a Mississippi country road and you're pulled over by the police. So that's how it was for me. And I will actually add on that when I got to college at the University of Mississippi, my frat brothers also sat a lot of us down, not just my frat brothers, the entire Black Greek organizations got the Black men together on campus, because this is a PWI, and said, okay, let me tell you what you should and should not do to make sure you graduate here. So I got to talk twice from my family and from my classmates at Ole Miss. Where did your talk come from? I'll start with you, Jerry.
Well, my talk came from my father, and the talk came in several stages. The first one was when I was in 3rd grade and we were moving from Queens to Brooklyn, and I was staying with the aunt in Queens, and I was taking public transportation for the first time by myself. So he was just telling me what to do and what not to do in terms of, this was the 80s, so it was more stranger danger than the police. The more specific police talk came later in high school, when the Central Park 5, now exonerated 5 trial and case became national news, because my high school, Regis, was actually a few blocks away from Central Park when it happened. So that was all very real to me. And a lot of those men were around my age when that all happened. And so he was telling me, listen, you know, say as little as you have to when you run into police, be respectful, but don't give them more information. And above all, get to us. I mean, this was pre-cell phones. So he was like, always keep change in your pocket to call us. Make sure that you can, you know, find a payphone. The key for him was to make sure that I got home, which is what I've passed on to my son when we first had the conversation. The idea was get home safely. Do whatever you need to do to make sure you come home to us. So that was when I first got the talk, was from my father.
And for you young ones out there, what he meant by keep some change in your pocket, there used to be these things called payphones that you had to put coins into to actually use them. And that brings up a really big question here, because things have changed so much that some of the things that our parents told us might not be relevant today. But we'll get to that in just a minute. Adrian, what was the talk like for you?
I think I had it in probably about 2 parts. Growing up in DC in the 80s and 90s, I mean, we could have a whole panel discussion on what that was like. You know, it was basically getting to adulthood and all the pitfalls, not just with the police, but stuff that was in the community as well. So, you know, one thing that my mother honed in was always, you know, don't be a statistic, make sure you come home, don't start any trouble, you know, stay on the straight and narrow. You know, which I credit to getting me to where I am today. And then I had an uncle who went out of DC. He was one of the first to actually go out of DC and go to school. He went to Lincoln. And that's kind of like, well, now it seems like a small world, but for us, it's like, oh, wow, what happened there? And he was able to give me the lessons learned that he learned leaving DC and going to Lincoln University. So I got it twice. You know, I think I am fortunate. Unlike Mississippi, DC is segregated, at least in the other way. But that still comes with its own troubles and own issues that you have to be prepared for. And I will just piggyback on having change. I remember having change and calling cards just to make sure you don't get stranded somewhere so you can get home safely. So I guess I've dated myself a little bit too.
Yeah, those calling cards must have been a DC thing, because they sure didn't work in Mississippi. So, all right, Fatiyn, what was the talk like for you, man?
It's interesting, you know, and I forgot about the calling cards, man. Wow, that's interesting. It's a little different for me. And the reason why I say it's a little different for me, because both my parents are from the South Carolina. My father's from Orangeburg and my mother was from the Darlington, Florence area in South Carolina. And their perspective of race was slightly different. Both of my parents understood racism, but my mother looked at the satisfaction of white people as a badge of honor. And I watched that, how she dealt with white folks and how she moved around them. And then most of the conversations between, you know, from my parents to me was about do the right thing, similar to what Adrian's saying, you know, stay out of trouble. If someone bothers you in the community, I'll be honest with you, the folks that bothered me in the community look like me. So I didn't, you know, and if we had an issue, I was in a community, a mixed community, white, Oriental, and Black. So we looked at stay out of trouble, this, that, and the other. The second phase of that conversation came when I was about to go to college, and the police came by in the night and they threw me and my friends up against the wall, not doing anything, just being outside, being profiled, but not understanding what profiling was at that particular time. Of course, I went and told my parents, and my father was like, well, maybe you shouldn't have been outside at that particular time. That ain't got nothing to do with it. At the time, I'm right across the street in front of my home. I didn't do anything. Why am I being thrown up against the wall? As time went on, watching television, conversing with friends, going to a predominantly white college, I started to experience racism, and I started to experience racism from police officers. So that's how I began to have the conversation, and also watching television programs like The Life of Dr. King and other issues like that. So that's how the conversation came up within my household. So it came up from my parents, came up from my friends, came up from my peers, and the community, because I was part of a community that had a whole host of other folks in that community. And when I saw a Black police officer, my father's friend, get really enraged, went home and put on his uniform. I did not know he was going to face his colleagues at a precinct because he was profiled and embarrassed in front of his wife by other colleagues that didn't know he was a police officer. So that's how I got my talk. And then my experiences in the movement, that's when I realized some of the racism that I was experiencing and starting to experience as a young man.
And Panama, bring us home. Are you part of the calling card or the quarters brigade?
10
I mean, I guess
brigade.
I'm on the tail end of it. I never had a calling card, I don't think, but I don't, maybe I just don't remember. I mean, I just turned 42 a couple of days ago. I definitely had change, but my conversation, like everybody else's, was in phases. And like many of us here who work in media, it's actually never stopped. Like it wasn't a talk back then. It was just, my father was breaking down life for me, and it started very early because I'm biracial. And I remember one of the first talks I remember having with my father was him saying very clearly, your mother is white, you are not. And I didn't really understand what that meant at the time, but he was pointing out there's a difference. There's a difference in how something, I didn't really get it. And over time, my father was he's a pretty quiet man, but when he decides to have these conversations, he was like, come on, boy, let's go take a walk. And we go take a 2-hour walk around this field. I grew up in Germany. I'm a military brat. So I went to high school in Alabama. So over the course of my life, I mean, I can't tell you how many times he just decided today's the day we need to have another talk, something that's important. And, the culmination of a lot of that was probably early on in high school. My father just very much echoed that I needed to make smart decisions, be very intentional about the decisions you make and who you're around, and what happens when you get pulled over, get home. He was very clear about those things. And I don't even know if I realized I internalized all of it. Your father's just talking to you about things. He's just telling you, do this, and I'm listening. I don't remember asking many questions. My father started talking, I just listened. But as I got older, I started realizing how much of that stuff sunk into my brain because it carried me through high school and through college. And I went to an HBCU. I went to Morris College in Atlanta. So I was in a very, very Black community. And the reason why I say those conversations never really ended is because I feel like been having that conversation for the entirety of my life since I got to college with my boys and friends, and as communities of people, and as a writer who writes about these things, and then listening to the radio, because of everything that's going on, it renews this conversation over and over again, to the point where now we call it the talk. Like white people know about this, the talk, you know what I mean? And it was just a conversation that my dad broke down for me. He was just telling me how to live and make it, so he didn't have to bury his son, you know what I'm saying? So, it's interesting that we're at this point in society where the talk is showing up in comic strips and in op-ed columns and all of these places, because it's kind of like how police brutality has been happening forever in the Black community, but now video cameras make sure that everybody can see it, right? Well, these conversations have been happening for everybody in the community as long as there's been a black parent with black children. There have been
Right.
conversations about how to get home and how not to die, or what the best practices, so that hopefully it ends up in your favor. But now it's a real talking point, like societally and policy wise. It's very fascinating how we've gotten there as just as a world and as a community.
And piggybacking on what you just said, that the talk is ongoing and has always been ongoing for us as Black fathers. I'm gonna come back with you with this question. Have you already had the talk with your kids? Now, for me, the first time I consciously remember talking to my son about this, and my kids will tell you I talk to them about stuff all the time, and I'll remember what I said the next day. But I consciously remember being in a store with my son and him wanting a water gun, and me telling him, you are a young Black boy. I can't risk you walking around playing in the neighborhood with something that looks like a gun, because it could be taken the wrong way. And earlier this year, I was sitting there watching the insurrection on January 6th with my daughter, watching CNN and trying to explain to her what was going on and the root cause of it, which goes back to the fear of African Americans. So I've had the talk in phases with my kids as they've gotten older, but I remember that my 8-year-old son, having to have that conversation with him about fear of Black boys and having a gun in a store and saying, we're not going to even pick this up. We're going to put it back because someone could be looking at the end of the aisle and call the police and say there's a young Black boy in here with a gun. So Panama, have you had that conversation, the talk yet? Or is it still coming in phases because you have children of different ages?
It's coming in phases. So for instance, my boys are 6'5" and 8 months. You know, it's not time for that yet for me. And I'll say this, an opportunity hasn't presented itself to me that it makes sense for my wife and I to have a conversation that heavy with children that small yet. Now, my daughter, on the other hand, she's an extremely aware 12-year-old. Social media, the internet, you know, it makes these kids way smarter than I was at 12. Like, their access to information and knowledge and all of that stuff is so much more advanced than I remember me paying attention. So I have talked with my daughter, and I know her mother has talked with her about racism, about police brutality, about what's going on, because she sees it. She understands these things are happening. And in schools, they talk about this stuff now too. Interestingly, like, the teachers are talking about this stuff. So I haven't sat her down to have that kind of conversation my father had, where we sit down and we do a lengthy talk about, you know, the police and all of that. We have had these conversations in bits and starts whenever things come up on TV. And because I unfortunately know this stuff is going to continue to happen, I know this conversation will be continuing, will be an evolving conversation over time. And my daughter's very inquisitive, so she asks questions. And she's very opinionated. So, you know, the conversations that we do have are they're happening. They are sometimes in bits and pieces, and you know, they're probably well more advanced than my father had with me at this point, because I know she already gets it. She sees more than I saw, and she just understands, and she's a Black child in America, you know.
All right, Adrian, what about you?
So I think, you know, for me, having a 9-year-old, things have become a little bit more organic because of social media, 24-hour news cycle. You know, I think I can harken back to maybe 2016, where my son has asked me, what's wrong with Donald Trump? You know, why is there so much racism? Because he's seeing it, you know, everywhere. So instead of being able to just sit down and say, okay, you're 9, you're 10, you're 11, 12, whatever it is, I'm addressing things that he's able to see, because the mediums that he can use are just, you know, so prevalent in society today. So, you know, it's just a long-winded way. I guess I think the talk has evolved. It has evolved since the dawn of the talk. And, I'm just addressing things as need be. I mean, of course, things come up and you address them right then and there, but it just seems like things are so prevalent, or maybe not so prevalent because they've always been prevalent. They're just so in our face that you don't get that innocence of just being in your small community where you are inoculated from a lot of this. It's for a lot of these kids now, it's just in their face. So, I say it's just more of an ad hoc. Every time you see something, whether it be on a magazine cover, whether it's something that was on YouTube, whether it's something that's on TV. I mean, even the commercials they may have on Nickelodeon now, where they get political, you have to answer. So that's how I've been handling it. With another one on the way, who knows how it'll be. Hopefully things are better and we can erase the talk, probably not. But, I think it's just going to be more in your face just because of how, we have cameras, but before we had cameras, you think about Rodney King, but it had to be grainy and it had to be on the news. Now you have a camera, it is on social media almost right after, if not while it happens. So, one way of saying, I think it's just no longer structured. It's just a conversation you'll have as something comes up, and they always seem to come up. And why we're probably even having this conversation today.
And Fatiyn, what about you?
Of course, there's numerous talks that went on in my house. And the first talk I walked in on, where my wife was discussing with our daughters at the time. The oldest was in the 3rd grade and the youngest one was in the 1st grade. And when I walked in, I saw my wife putting a condom on a cucumber. So what the heck is going on here? Remember, I have 2 daughters. So the first talk that I walked in on was my wife saying, they're not going to learn this out there. I'm going to teach it here so they learn it the correct way. So with daughters, there's different type of talks. And as a father, there were certain things that I left for my wife to deal with the young ladies. Now, of course, when we're talking about racism, being an active father, being on Oprah Winfrey, Phil Donahue, even I bring up the Million Man March, even though my wife was pregnant with the second one, and the oldest was 3. Our car broke down on the Verrazano Bridge, headed down to the Million Man March. So that has always been a reference and a talking point inside our house. But I've had these conversations with my daughters when they became junior high school. Well, basically the end of elementary school, between like 5th, 6th, going into middle school, of having this conversation, because they have not only female friends, they have male friends. And you got to realize that you have to govern yourself when you're out of that house. And you got to realize that you may not be doing something, but somebody in your group could be doing something. And that can lead to the police approaching you. And if you don't know how to handle yourself because you are a person of color, at the end of the day, because we have the problems between the police and Black youth and Black people, that you have to be prepared. So I've had this talk with my daughters at a fairly early age. And as life went on through their experiences, they've had certain experiences with friends in the street, that they would come back home and have these kind of conversations. So this is an ongoing conversation. And then, of course, somebody just mentioned Donald Trump. When Donald Trump was president, and just watching, well, let's take it back. When President Obama, you got to realize, for us, a lot of us didn't think we would even see a Black president at our time. You understand? But for our children, for them to see an African-American president in the White House with a Black family, not mixed, that was very interesting. So our conversations went on, and then to see it looked like the clock rolled back when Donald Trump took office, and how things were done. It made the conversation move faster than I ever thought, in a sense of the things that continue to go on. So now it's more of an adult conversation. But now my children are grown and adults, and they have a lot of questions, and there's a lot of whys and this and that, and I give it to them the best way that I can.
And Jerry, have you had the talk yet?
Yes, my son, as I mentioned, is 18. The first time we had a talk of that nature was when Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman, and he was trying to make sense of what was going on. I even wrote an article for the site I was running at the time, the Urban Daily, called "What Do I Tell My Son?" Because he was learning what justice was or wasn't. You know, okay, this man killed this young boy just for walking down the street. Why isn't he in jail? And I had to give him the tough answer that justice doesn't always the justice system doesn't always administer justice. And that was a really hard conversation to have with him, that he could be harmed by someone and the police wouldn't be there to help him. The legal system wouldn't be there to help him. And, you know, we've had different versions of that conversation with each subsequent, you know, Mike Brown, you know, Philando Castile. And as he's gotten older, he knows that it's a reality, but doesn't make it any easier. And, you know, both of my children going to predominantly white schools, I've had to arm them with this reality that, you know, you will be perceived a certain way by some people because of this color of your skin. And that's something that they've, you know, both internalized differently. My daughter is definitely more vocal. She's more rah-rah, you know, I'm Black with a capital B. My son's a little more subdued. Let's try to get along, but he's aware of the challenges that face him as he steps out into the world. And then we've had a secondary conversation as he's learning to drive now, which is, you know, a whole other, you know, there's the pedestrian talk and then there's the driver's talk. And as a New Yorker, my father didn't drive, so I didn't get that driver's talk. You know, I got it pretty much from my peers, like, you know, friends, fraternity brothers, about, hey, this is what you do on road trips. You know, my first road trips were in college. So we all had decorum that we had to learn. Okay, don't have any open bottles of any kind, you know, while you're driving, and just being aware of the speed limits and things of that nature. That's when it really crystallized for me. But that first conversation, unfortunately, was when Trayvon Martin was killed. And it's not an aberration. You know, he sees it now, like, wait a minute, this wasn't just a thing that happened one time and it was a tragedy. It's something that keeps happening. And that's the hardest part, I think, trying to convey to both of my children, that this is something that's ongoing and I don't have a clear answer as to how to make it stop.
Now, I'm gonna throw this question out for anyone, because this is something that I've been batting back and forth when we decided to have this conversation. The talk is normally aimed at young Black men, even though it can be given to Black girls as well. Does the talk have to come from a man, or can that talk come from a woman? And I'll just open it up to anybody on that one.
I mean, absolutely, it can come from someone other than a man. I know my wife has had different versions of conversations with both of them, and her perspective is different because she was a young driver. You know, she lived in Queens. She grew up in Queens, so she was driving as a teenager. So her perspective is different. But absolutely, if you can find a male figure, great. If you wanted to have that perspective, but mothers and aunts and cousins are perfectly capable of giving this talk if necessary. That's my short answer.
Yeah, I'll hop in here. Yeah, I'll hop in here too. I mean, you know, what is the talk about, right? The talk is essentially about making sure that young Black boys, Black girls, whoever gets home safely, right? That's typically when I think of the talk that we're having with our kids and whoever. It's about making sure that you get home. That's a conversation for everybody, right? That the past 10 years of video footage and all of the Black Lives Matter have taught us that this is not a Black man conversation in and of itself. Now, there are issues that Black men face that differently than Black girls do, obviously, but we all have sets of issues that we are facing at the hands of oppressive individuals and oppressive institutions. And Black women know very well. I mean, it's a community issue, right? The loss of Black men to police is a community issue, right? The loss of Black women to police is a community issue. It impacts our ability to sustain and grow and build a community that can continue to thrive and be successful and impart knowledge and wisdom into the youth. So absolutely, anybody who has experienced being Black in this country has a perspective about what happens to Black people in this country that they can impart, that can help the world, help another person be a little bit more prepared for whatever is coming next for them.
I believe I just I second what you both said in regards of a black male or a black female being capable of having this conversation. But one of the things that you mentioned at the beginning of the show, that some black men or black fathers get bad raps. And as I brought up the Million Man March back in 1995, we were summoned to Washington, D.C. by Minister Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam, and not because of the outside things that were being done to us as a community. We were summoned there on the things that we as Black men were not doing. So I bring that up in the perspective is that, yes, a Black man and a Black woman is capable of having this conversation. But at the end of the day, it's also your circumstance. There's a lot of Black households. I don't want to fall into a stereotype, but let's be real. There are a lot of Black households that are ran by Black women. And some Black women don't have the help of the Black male. And they have to go out there and work, come home, deal with homework, deal with cooking and dealing with this. And their priorities may be different. Their heart may be in the right place, but their priorities may be different. So why do I say that? Because I was not the kind of parent that did not participate in my child's school. I did not just leave it for the woman or the moms to go to the PTA meetings. I was a member of the PTA. I was a member of the school leadership team. So I was part of the system that helped educate our children. And I just would see how hard it would even get parents to come out to PTA meetings because they had a full day of doing a lot of things. Some were irresponsible. That goes for male and females. But we have to take a look at the priority. How do we prioritize our lives and how some of our folks are living that life, and even though you know right from wrong, how do you prioritize that kind of conversation with your children? At the end of the day, some folks are just dealing with just trying to get your children aligned with passing in school. Some parents are worrying about, how do I live check to check? So yes, we've all may have had similar experiences, but when it comes to prioritizing the kind of conversation with your children, at some moments, for some of us, we live in the moment. And that's how I look at it.
What about you, Adrian? Any thoughts on this one?
I mean, I think they're all great points. And the only thing I'll add, and not to belabor the point, is just that the talk, as we've been talking about it in the context of this panel, is so critical that everybody in our community needs to be able to have that talk, because the results of someone not getting it could be so devastating that I'm not going to say, oh, I'd rather the husband or the wife or the mother or the father give it, as long as it's given. So I agree with everybody before me, and just want to highlight just how critical it is that we educate each other generation so that we can continue and grow as a people.
Now, let me throw a twist in all of this here. Many of these young brothers and young sisters who are politically and socially active say the talk only is a version of respectability politics, that we're telling them that they need to sit back and take it and not express their views and not express themselves when it comes to speaking up and speaking out. That we as older, and I'm saying older because I think everybody over here is over 35. I mean, Panama looks kind of young there, but we're all over 35. And I'm going to hit the big 50 next month myself. But they say the talk is just another new version of respectability politics. We're telling them to sit down, be quiet, don't say anything, don't confront the racism and sexism that we see out there. Do y'all agree with that? What do you think about that?
Listen, I know that there's no shield against police brutality. I know that wearing a suit is not going to keep me safe any safer than wearing a hoodie. I understand that. But let me tell you, when it comes to mine, I want to arm them with everything possible to get them home alive. And if it means saying less, If it means not being, I don't want my kids to try and be lawyers in that moment. I think it's really unfair to expect children to be politically savvy and trained to deal with police officers in that way. So my job is to give them the tools to de-escalate as much as possible within their power. They can't control that police officer. They can't control what they do. They can control themselves and do what they can. And we all know instances where Black folk weren't doing anything wrong and still ended up dead. I'm not excusing this. I'm not saying that there's a foolproof plan for avoiding police brutality, and honestly, the talk takes on different elements for me too. One of the first talks I had with my children was about consent and body autonomy. It wasn't even about the outside world yet. It was about, okay, you're interpersonal. This is your body, and this is what you are allowed to. You can touch yourself, but someone else can't. And you make sure that they respect your boundaries, and you respect the boundaries of others. That was the other part of that talk. As much as you respect your body, you make sure you respect someone else's body. So I don't think having these talks is anyway some kind of respectability politics, because it's teaching my kids to respect themselves above all. So I don't see how that is in any way counterproductive to advancement, for Black folks to teach our kids how to protect themselves. That's crazy to me.
Now, Fatiyn, I'm going to put you on the spot here, because I'm going to say, I remember sitting down on my mother's couch and talking to my teenage nieces and them saying, if a policeman pulled me over, I'm going to tell him that I'm not going to put up with this and that he's going to have to prove that I did something wrong. And I remember sitting there going, don't say any of that. Just hand him your license and your insurance papers and be quiet, because your job is to make it back home. Did I tell him wrong?
Oh, you didn't tell him wrong. You're smart about it. But let's be honest about this. And I have this book in front of me right now, White Rage by Carol Anderson, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide. And that white rage don't mean that there's white rage and there's no Black anger. What you just said and what Jerry just said is the bottom line, is that you want your child to make it home safe. But if we have this conversation and don't deal with the emotional part that our children are feeling, you got to realize, brothers, and I'm speaking from experience, I marched in Bensonhurst when Yusuf Hawkins got shot and killed. Trayvon Martin, I was in the middle of that fight. I was there when Reverend Sharpton pulled the knife out of his chest. I'm the only one standing over him when he took that knife in the chest. And don't think I hadn't have that anger. We had to be taught how to control ourselves. But brothers, I'm telling you, it was a time when, we'll step up to the plate. The same thing about the Montgomery bus boycott. Folks don't know that there were a lot of Black folks that wanted to break that boycott. And when Dr. King went to sleep, I'm telling you facts, what I know. Certain people had to go around and knock on doors and give those folks the talk that they were not going to break that bus boycott. So yes, brothers, you are right. The talk is not about being passive, and our children has to understand it's not about being passive. There's a time to expose that anger, and you have to be strategic in how you go about it. A lot of people didn't understand Dr. King, but Dr. King and Malcolm X was saying the same thing, but they said it differently. And if you look at Malcolm X, he said a lot of things. But if you look at the tactics that he did when that brother got beaten and was in that precinct, and when Malcolm X surrounded that precinct, they didn't say a word, they didn't curse, they didn't break a bottle, but they surrounded that precinct. They used a tactic of Dr. King, and they were successful in getting that brother aid that got beaten. So we got to have a strategic conversation with our children and explain that when we have this conversation, we are trying to save their lives, but we can't just stop there. We have to arm our children and give them strategies as they can fight and see results. Because if they don't see results, then all they're going to think is we just talk and we just smoke and no action.
Adrian, Panama, what do you think?
I think I agree with a lot of what's been said, but I want to harken back on when we do these things, is to provide folks with the tools they need to make the best decision going forward. Without the tools, you're just ignorant and you're exposed. We talked about a traffic stop. Now I've gone down to YouTube police videos probably way too often some nights just looking at this stuff, and I'm still learning. But it's not, we can see mainly white folks go and they can yell at the cops, or you can shoot up a church and then get Burger King on the way back. Should we be able to do the same thing? Absolutely, but that's just not the world we're living in. But if we arm our children, our youth, and even our peers with the education and the stuff that we have, I don't see how we can be worse off. I think what we're dealing with now is just a lot of pent up rage and anger, because it's so in your face, and it's almost every other day you're seeing another news story. So it's like, I want to counterpunch with everything I have, and we're saying, hey, well, be smart about it. Well, I don't want to be smart because I'm mad. So I think we do have to balance just the rage of, why is this happening? It's 2021. I thought this was something I learned about in history, or maybe I didn't learn about in history in some parts of in the country. This shouldn't be happening. I want to fight back with the lessons learned that we all grew up with. I think it's a tightrope, but even going back to, obviously I was not marching in the 60s, but those who did in the civil rights era, I'm sure they had a talk too. And they used that to create the tools they use for protesting and mobilization and voter registration and political action and social justice. And I just think we just have to balance that. And also, like I said, just deal with the rage that's so bottled up, that how can it be so brazen that we can watch someone get shot and no one go to jail? Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of behavioral health issues that we're going to have to also deal with, because it's just so prevalent. It's not, we heard about something happen or we just saw it on the evening news. So, I don't think it's anything wrong with having a talk and telling people the ropes to skip and the ropes to know. But I also think we do have to be a little bit more sensitive and understanding that there's probably a lot of more built up rage than even we had growing up. And we have to listen to them and let them be able to vent it, so that those folks can come back home safely.
Panama? Yeah, so I understand that anger and that rage and that desire to get results immediately, right? We're in a different time than when I even grew up, where the youth of today are getting things done differently. They are actively getting out there in the streets. They are not taking no for an answer in ways that even I watch this and I'm like, wow, I wouldn't even dawn on me to think that I had the power to do that kind of thing, right? Like social media, access to community organizing in ways that it makes it easier to find your tribe. And it turns out that tribe is huge, easier in getting people together in a space to protest is much easier than it used to be. So what I would say to those individuals, that you got to realize there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? There are people like yourself, you want those instant results. And also this is very situational. It's very different when there's 100 of y'all marching on somewhere to speak about police brutality or something that happened to somebody, versus you being pulled over by yourself by a police officer and you have a camera. Now that camera is a weapon. Don't get me wrong. It is a weapon, but some of those cameras get pulled out of folks' hands, and then what happens, right? People don't turn their body cameras on. So it's very situational how you deal with whatever has come upon you, right? The goal is always to make sure that you have an opportunity to get out of that situation the same way you went into it, so that you can use that voice and tell your story on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, or whatever it is, or on the blogs, or tell the stories. I mean, we have more people telling stories now and expressing their issues with institutional racism and oppression than ever before in all these different ways. The most important is to make sure that more and more people have the opportunity to do that. And you can't do that if you don't get home. And I'm speaking as somebody who was a hothead to police. I've definitely popped off of police officers before. I remember a cop pulled me over when I was 18. No, I might have been 17 when I got pulled over, and he asked a stupid question. I'm like, you ask a stupid question, you're going to get a stupid answer. The cop was like, I was going too fast. And he was like, sir, you've been driving, if you've been driving on the wrong side of the road, you'd have been in an accident. It's like, well, why would I be driving on the wrong side of the road? Of course I'm going to be in an accident. I popped off because I'm like, you saying something stupid to me, like I'm not smart enough to be having an interaction with you. And I got a ticket every single time. You know what I mean? Like it was never worth it. I got a ticket every time, but at least I walked away with my life. I I would never tell my kids to do that because it feels like the stakes they're just different. I don't know why it seems like the police are either more trigger happy than they've ever been. They're more pissed than they've ever been because of all the people who decided that they don't like cops now. Now cops are fighting back the only way they know how. It's like, it feels different. So it feels like you need to get home so that you can use that voice and that anger and that frustration and channel it in a way that's going to help make the community better. And I agree with everything y'all saying about mental health and making sure that young people, old people, all of us have a form of PTSD from dealing with police officers and being in oppressive states in these communities that we've been in. And that's not saying that Black joy doesn't exist. I'm a big proponent of Black joy, but we do need to address the mental health of these people who are frustrated by these things and are pissed and want to. They're like, I need to be out there fighting. It's like, you know what you do? Let's make sure you can fight for as long as possible by being smart while you're doing it.
Can I just jump in here real quick, just before you move on? So I'm going to push the envelope a little differently, just to make us just have this conversation, you know, look at it from another angle. And we all talk about this anger and this rage. And, you know, just like I had a pet cat, and if I kept antagonizing my cat, you know, my cat came out scratching. And the point I'm trying to say is that we march and we do this and we do that. But I remember when, I'm not condoning this and saying this is the right way to go about doing this, but I remember when there was an individuals started shooting at police officers in Texas. President Obama hurry up, got down there and had a summit. I see NAFAC, the No Effing Around Coalition, that know they know their constitutional rights, bear arms, know what they're doing, showed up around other armed white folks and got those other armed white folks to at least back up and respect them. I remember when the congressman spoke against the leader and the leader didn't back up. And the next thing you know, you had that white congressman apologizing to the NAFAC leader and then coming on his show and inviting him over to his house. So I'm telling you now that yes, we all want our children and our loved ones to make it home. But if we are in a war, there's going to be casualties on both sides. And I'm tired of getting shot in the back of my head. I'm telling you, enough is enough. And young folks now are not taking it like some of our other ancestors that came before us. And not to say they took it, it's just that they just are responding differently.
I try to teach my kids or talk to them in terms of ROI, return on investment, with everything they do. What are you getting out of this thing that you're doing? And for me, if it's their one-on-one interaction with a police officer, what is the return on investment on you popping off with that cop? What is that going to diminish the likelihood of you getting a ticket? Is that going to diminish the likelihood of you getting pulled out of the car and slammed up? Popping off in those one-on-one situations more often than not is not going to help. So while I acknowledge and accept the anger that comes with that, that is not what I want my kids to lead with in that situation, you know, because their safety is what's paramount. If we're talking about collective and group action, right, I'm all for that. That's perfect. And that's the time. I know they don't like to hear this isn't the time, but if we're talking about the very specific instance where it's my child versus a police officer, I don't think, yes, they should know their rights, but I don't think them being combative with the police officer, because I'm speaking from experience. I've been pulled over many times, and by the grace of God, I've made it home. All I did was exactly what they wanted me to do. License, registration. Do you know why I pulled you over? Yes, no. Here, take this ticket. Here's this court appearance. And I was on my way. I could have argued if I felt like I was in a position to argue it. I could have argued it. But in that instance, if they're just going to give me a ticket anyway, what is me in that instance going to solve by saying, well, what did you pull me over for? I was only doing 59 and then 60. Like, where is that going? How is that helping you? It might be cathartic to some people to yell at the cop, but how is that going to improve your situation?
I think it's twofold. I think it's twofold. So sometimes you feel a bit of satisfaction of yelling at that police officer, but you have to realize that all you did is blew off steam at that moment. But if you strategize and move forward from there, Brother Jerry, then I see us being intelligent and smart. So I blew off a little steam. I didn't really, I blew off a little steam. I still got that ticket. I pay that ticket. But you know what now? I'm going to take that police test. Now, not only I become a police officer, I move up the ranks and I make a difference, or I become a lawyer. We have to arm our children with tools and, like you said, be smart, but strategize so that we can put ourselves in a better position at another day to come back and be better than they are and make a difference and make a change.
Well, believe it or not, we've been talking for about an hour now. This time goes fast when we have these type of conversations. So I'm going to actually end with asking all of you this one question. So especially for those of us who are adjacent to the entertainment industry, there's a lot of talk about the viewing of Black pain on video. Whether we're talking about slavery or we're talking about Michael Brown on YouTube, there's a lot of conversation that maybe our children, and not only our children, but ourselves, we're getting overwhelmed with seeing Black pain. And not only that, that some people are getting used to it, that is not as impactful to see these police videos or to see depictions of slavery, because we see so much of it. Are we letting our children and our sons and daughters see too much with these videos? And is it going to have a negative effect on them? Jerry, I'll start with you.
Well, for the entertainment part, I don't know if there's a direct correlation between the slave films and police brutality videos, but I would say that I shield myself from a lot of the videos. Like I've only, I might look at a screenshot, but there's some that I just won't consume. I'll read about it, but I don't necessarily have to see the visual because they do just make me angry because I can't do anything about something that already happened. So what am I going to do moving forward? As far as my kids, I don't really monitor what they're watching in terms of social media that much. We're in family group chats and they share things. As far as have they watched the police brutality videos, I don't think they have. And I think if they did, they'd probably talk to me about it. I don't feel the need to show it to them. If it happens, hey, did you see the shooting of this young man or this young woman? No. I think I'm overwhelmed in general by social media. The opinions have overwhelmed me, but the visuals have definitely overwhelmed me. For entertainment purposes and for entertainment in terms of the slavery question, I think we need more, not less. We need more done by us. I think, for example, Barry Jenkins' series, The Underground Railroad is fantastic. I don't think the existence of 12 Years a Slave means that series shouldn't exist. I think we need balance and options. I don't think we need fewer slave narrative TV shows. I think we just need more depictions of modern Black life. And we have them. We have shows like, Ava DuVernay's Queen Sugar and others that are coming up. But I would like to personally just see more depictions of what it's like to be a Black father in 2021, trying to survive a pandemic versus, always it being about what happened in the past. But I don't think that means we shouldn't have those films either, because as many as we've seen, there's still an array of stories from the enslaved that we haven't heard. So if those movies can get made, and knowing how education works in this country, people don't know about things until it's on TV. Look at all the talk about Tulsa now because of what was shown on Watchmen.
Right.
Think of if the awareness has been exponential. So I can't dismiss film and TV as a medium for educating or at least bringing awareness to certain subjects. So I won't ever say we don't need more slave narratives and movies. but I think we can use more modern day depictions or even futuristic predictions like Black Panther, which I love because the first word in Black Panther is father. The first word uttered is Baba, which is father. And that was the thing that hooked me in right away, realizing that that was like a young Killmonger talking to his father. You don't realize it till you watch it the second time what was happening, but it's not to go off topic, but that's those depictions of Black life, I think can use more balance, but I don't think that means less depictions of violence and slavery, because as hard as some parts of the Underground Railroad were for me to watch, Barry Jenkins didn't pull any punches. It was still done with care and understanding in the context. And I think it takes us telling those stories. I don't think we should shy away from telling those stories. You look at a series like High on the Hog, what the difference is when it's one of us telling the story and putting it together, how much of a difference that made. The first years of Hollywood, that wasn't us telling, I mean, yes, Alex Haley was the author of Roots, but it wasn't always us. And I think the more we get involved with telling that story, we won't have the fatigue that I think is associated with it right now.
Adrian, what do you think?
No, I agree wholeheartedly. And to the first part of your question, I don't think there's ever such thing within reason and age appropriateness of too much information. You can never have too much history, too much information. But, I think as Jerry is alluding to, you almost get worn down when that's all you see, the stuff on social media, or what I call the struggle movies that happen. And that's where you end up with the response that we all saw with Black Panther. I'm sure everybody saw on social media, everybody dressing up, going to see the movie 5-10 times, because it gave us a different look of something that the richness of our culture and what it could be and what we aspire to see, other than, I say it all the time, it's just like the shows I watch is either you're a rapper, you're an athlete, or you're doing drugs on TV. I mean, and then you get the Cosbys and the Blackish, or just one show. So it's completely unbalanced when it comes to just what does it look like every day. I was just joking with somebody the other day. I said, whatever happened to that show Rock? It was just a guy who was a sanitation worker, and he took care of his family, and he was fighting against that. Those things get canceled. But when you look at TV and it's not Black media, it runs the gamut of some of the worst things you can see and some of the most positive things. Just with us, it almost always errs on either the most negative things or the struggle kind of stuff. And while I don't think they should go away, we got to do a better job of telling positive stories and things that our kids can look at and aspire to. For me growing up, it was the Cosbys. I mean, when I think about the Cosbys now, I'm like, how unrealistic that was. At that point in time, there was no racism, no struggle, no discrimination. And you had a lawyer and a doctor, and all their kids were going off to school and things like that. I mean, they did that in the 80s, and that's hard to do in 2021. But if we have more shows like that in Black media, and the responsibility of Black media is to inspire hope and optimism for something to strive for. I think it's fine with 12 Years a Slave and all the other documentaries, but we have to have stuff that's aspirational and gives people hope to deal with the struggle and issues like that. So I'd be interested to hear what the other brothers have to say on this, but I've been harping on it all the time. It's like I can only watch so much Blackish. Where's everything else?
Fatiyn.
I agree. I think there needs to be more of a balance, but we have to take charge of that narrative. If we leave it to other folks out there to give us that balance, then we fall short. So I've given my children as much as possible when they were growing up, to the point now, as let's break this up into 2 points. In social media, I look at some of the things that my daughters discuss. They discuss issues that affect our community. When they see Black boys, Black girls doing negative things to each other, they share those things and they have conversations about those things. The same way that they have about police brutality, they have those conversations and they're sharing those things. When you look at television, I come up in the Good Times era, where a lot of my friends lived in the projects. I didn't live in the projects. I happened to live in a mixed neighborhood. I lived in an apartment building at that particular time. I lived on a block where my friends came out of a house with a tree-lined block. but that wasn't a reality to some. But to those that lived in the projects, that wasn't the whole reality to all Black folks. So we have to give a balance. So when I'm gonna name an old picture, Imitation of Life. When my children were young, they watched Imitation of Life, and they saw the racism in that movie, but they also saw a light-skinned Black woman that wanted to run away from her Blackness because of racism, and then the pain of the losing the mother in that film. My kids adapted to that. Spook That Sat by the Door shows an individual that was fed up with the system, but he was smart. He played the system, got the tools from the system, and then went back and armed this community to fight against the system. So we have to give that balance. As you just brought up the Cosby Show. So I came up with Good Times, and I came up with the Cosby Show. My kids came up with Family Matters, but they also watch Good Times and they also watch the Cosby Show. I gave them that. They watch Roots and they watch the other programs, and I give them this as tools so we can have a conversation and bring that forward to where we at today, so that they can have a conversation in their world today before they have their children, which has become my grandchildren. So I just think that we have to give them that balance, because if we don't give them that balance and leave it up to somebody else, the other folks may not be as responsible as we will be with our own children.
And Panama, before you jump in here, I just have to say that something you said to me a few days ago has stuck in my head, and it's a great TV show for somebody, the Black Father Stroller Brigade, that Panama could see from his house. The brothers pushing the strollers with their children. What are those brothers talking about to each other? Are they talking about this topic? Panama.
I have no idea what they're talking about. I saw one of them out there today. It's hot outside, so my kids are inside. But
that's the balance today. Coolness.
And listen, I don't know why he's out the house, but I know why I'm staying in. So, this what you're asking about is very interesting. This layer. So let me start with the being overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed by all the video and all this stuff. Absolutely, and I'm afraid of becoming desensitized to it. Like seeing so much of it that it's just another thing that happens. And I'm glad that a lot of young people that see these things are moved and called to action. I'm just afraid we're so used to seeing it now that it just doesn't register the way that it used to. So even with my kids, I don't know if my daughter watches all those videos and stuff like that. My younger ones don't, obviously. But I do want to speak specifically to this Black media point, like we're talking about television, the imagery and stuff. So it feels like there's a new slave narrative every week now. It feels like in some way, shape, or form, there's a Harriet Tubman story getting told another way next week. Now, I will say it's interesting. I remember when the movie Harriet came out, I wrote an article and I was like, I'm glad this movie exists so some of y'all can actually find out where the Underground Railroad ran from. Because some people really think Harriet Tubman was walking from New Orleans to Toronto and back every couple of weeks. People don't have any idea where Harriet Tubman actually lived. It's people in DC that don't know that the Harriet Tubman was, a couple counties away. People don't realize that. Right. So people don't realize, you're right, Jerry. Like people learn a whole lot through TV. People don't, despite the millions of books that seem to exist in Barnes and Noble and all these, and that all of us own. I don't know how many books anybody else is reading, because it just seemed like a lot of that book knowledge is hard to get. But let me also say this. I am one of those people who lives a very curated Black existence, especially when it comes to my entertainment. So what I mean by this is when I go into my Netflix queue, it tells me movies popular in America today is stuff like You Got Served. Now, let's be real. You Got Served is not popular in anybody's household on any day of the week at any time of the year. But my Netflix queue is so Black that it tells me that this is what's popular for people like me. My Amazon Prime feed is so embarrassingly Black at times that the movies that I see, I guarantee you all will never have heard of. But you know what? I watch them. I don't ever have to watch Friends. I don't ever have to watch any of this stuff because there's so much Black content out there if we go look at it. I liken it to the hip hop discussions from the 90s about commercial versus the underground, right? Like everybody who was underground was mad that, the people only listen to Puffy and them. It's like they weren't listening to that real hip hop, but people didn't want to go find it either. if you go in Netflix, which everybody has, and just, I don't know what the great unlock key is, where you hit that one movie and all of a sudden it opens up all the blackest movies that ever existed known to man and the ones that are being made. Did y'all know there's an entire Southwest Detroit cinematic universe out there? These brothers make movies and TV shows, and I mean, it is fascinating.
Yeah.
And my point is, I literally watch TV series, movies about all facets of Black life that aren't all about negativity. They aren't all folks. They're not all rappers. There's a lot of drugs. There's a lot of people. I rather enjoy those. That's why I tend to watch them. You know, the drug shows without scripts are fascinating. Trust me. But you know, it's like, I think there's a way that we can see all these positive stories because they exist. People are making movies left and right. I don't even know if there's a barrier to entry on Amazon. Like, if you just want to make a movie today and up that bad boy tomorrow, it's available. But there's all these depictions of Black life that are out there told by men and women and children and folks, that are movies and films that are, some are terrible, don't get me wrong, some are absolutely horrendous, but they exist. And it lets me know that people are out here trying to tell stories. They need to go to film school, but they are out here trying to get their stories on. So my point is largely that I think that balance exists. I think we all probably need to do a better job of finding it, and then like uplifting that stuff so that other people knows it's out there. Like, that one of the things I like to do on VSB, like I really don't write about Black pain and struggle anymore. Like, I don't even write about whiteness anymore. I don't write about the white gaze anymore. I literally pretty much only write about celebrating, uplifting Black culture. And one thing I do by doing that is talk about all these movies and TV shows and stuff that I watch on all these spaces, because so much of it exists. And a lot of it is actually good and tells the very stories that a lot of us want to see. You don't have to watch the Family Matters type show where the Black father's a cop. No, the Black father could be a carpenter or a mason or something like that. You know, you get that type of stuff. So, you know, when it comes to media, I think there's a lot of depictions, especially of Black positive male figures in a lot of these movies and a lot of these shows. We just got to go out there and find it. And to be fair, you know, it's, everybody doesn't know this stuff is out there. It's not all promoted the same way. Like, the Underground Railroad by Barry Jenkins is going to get that promo push because it's Barry Jenkins, right? That's going to get a different push than shows on BET Plus or these random movies that show up and stuff like that. But you know, that's where we come in. The people who have an opportunity and a voice and the ability to speak. Like, you know, Jesse, your book is back here. You know, when I do my Zoom call, sometimes your book is back there, right? So people know this exists. If they're looking, you know, we all like to look at people's backgrounds in Zoom, you know, like, I'm trying to figure out where Fatiyn is. I'm like, oh, what's going on back there? Like, you know, we look at these things. So I put little things back there that people take a look at, and people ask me, what is that? Oh, that's a Black store that I go to. That's this, you know, just because it makes it possible to share that messaging and share those stories so that we can focus on Blackness, as opposed to worrying about where we're going to get those other images, because they're out there. We just got to go out there and get them and be open to the fact that they exist, you know, as opposed to waiting for them to be provided to us, which a lot of us do, myself included. Don't get me wrong. I'm not absolving myself from that. But I also have now actively made sure to go, when I'm bored, I go into Amazon Prime and just search. And, you know, listen, sometimes I watch for 10 minutes. Sometimes I watch for the whole 2 hours, you know, but I found a lot of great depictions of Blackness where I don't feel like I'm missing anything.
Right. Just to piggyback on that quickly, that's why I started my podcast, because I wanted to put those depictions and let people know that these men exist, that Black fathers are out here. Those artists that those actors that you know, those rappers that you know, those DJs, they're fathers and they love their kids. And this is what it's like parenting for them, and they appreciate it because there aren't that many outlets where they can talk about just that, because typically they're going out to promote their film or their album. They're doing interviews about that and can't really talk about their children and their families. So I just wanted to add that we have to do it ourselves.
And Fatiyn, real quick.
I just wanted to add two things real quick. Is we look at all of the isms, the racism and this, that, and the other, but how many times have we seen on live television the people that are supposed to protect and serve us kill a person that looked like us? When George Floyd died on television, we saw a man lose his life. We saw his life seep from his body. And on the other side, the flip side of balancing it, we as Black fathers and Black men that are responsible, we must also continue to push the narrative of what we do to one another and not weaponize it against police brutality. But we can talk about police brutality, but we can also have the conversation about what we need to do to continue to build the Black family and stop being destructive to one another.
Well, not only are we out of time, we are in overtime. So I am going to ask everyone in 15 seconds, tell our followers where they can find you next. Your social media information is going to be in the chat and in the comments on on Facebook. But really quickly, tell us where we can find you next, Jerry.
At JL Barrow on Twitter or Instagram, or Fathers Who Bother on Instagram, or Fathers Who Be on Twitter. You can find me there.
Adrian.
Yes, and real simple. It's right there in the handle. It's on Twitter and IG at AJordanDC.
Panama.
You can find me every day at VerySmartBrothas.com and on Instagram, Twitter at Panama Jackson or at VerySmartBros.
And Fatiyn.
Facebook, Fatiyn Muhammad, and on Twitter at Fatiyn25, and also at Openline on WBLS Live every Sunday morning, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. And then on WBLS Facebook page, Sunday mornings, 9:05 to about 12 noon. And that's WBLS on Facebook, and also Wednesday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Same thing, WBLS Facebook page live.
And of course, you can find me every Saturday morning at 7 a.m. on Washington Journal on C-SPAN. Not having this conversation, this would be one we need to have on C-SPAN. And you can also find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all your favorite social media sites. I want to thank all of our great Black fathers for being on here, and I want to wish all of you a happy Father's Day. Hopefully you'll get better than tying socks, but you know, that's how it goes sometimes. And I'd like to thank everybody who has stuck with us through this conversation. Let us know what you think. Hit us up on our social media, and maybe we can have more of these conversations down the road. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Happy Father's Day, and everyone else have a great Sunday.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Peace.